Everything begins in a moment so small, so quiet, that Cole Harding, known to most of the county as a man of few words and even fewer acts of kindness, almost walks right past it. The sun had already fallen when he returned to his ranch that evening. The sky was a deep navy blue, the stars beginning to shimmer along the edges of the horizon. Cole had spent the entire day riding fence lines and repairing a broken stretch near the southern creek. His hands were sore, his back stiff, and all he wanted was a plate of food and a warm bed. But the world had other plans for him that night. As his boots hit the first step of the wooden porch, he noticed something odd, something that shouldn't have been there. A shape. No. 3 shapes. At first he thought maybe a stray animal had curled up under the rail again. But as he drew closer, the lantern he held cast a soft glow over the scene. His breath caught without his permission. There, leaning against the wall of his house, was a woman. Pale hair loose around her shoulders, face sunburned and streaked with dust. Her arms wrapped around 2 children, a boy perhaps 7 or 8, and a little girl no older than 4. They were all asleep, huddled together like a small, worn-down family of birds seeking refuge beneath the eaves of an abandoned barn. Cole froze, because this kind of sight was not part of his life. He lived alone by choice, not because he disliked people, but because the pain of losing his own family many years ago had carved a quiet cave in his heart, where no one else had been allowed to step. The ranch was silent, predictable, and safe. Other people, with their stories and their needs and their vulnerabilities, were not, yet here they were. On his porch. In his world. His lantern light flickered over the woman again. She had clearly been traveling for days. Her dress was torn on the hem. Her boots were scuffed. The children looked equally worn, their small faces smudged with dirt, their clothes stiff from dried sweat and dust. And clutched in the woman's hand loosely enough that it might have fallen any moment was a note. Not addressed to him, but written in a shaky hand. He knelt slowly, careful not to wake them, and gently eased the note free. The paper was wrinkled, the ink slightly smeared. He didn't read it yet. Instead, he just stared at the sleeping family, trying to piece together what could have brought them here. A long silence stretched out across the porch. The wind whispered around the stable. Crickets sang their nighttime chorus. Cole felt a strange tightening in his chest. He didn't know these people. He didn't owe them anything. And yet, the little girl shifted in her sleep. Her head flopped sideways, landing directly against her brother's shoulder. The boy stirred and, without waking, scooted closer to shield her. Then, in the quiet of night, the little girl let out the tiniest, softest snore. Cole blinked. He stared. Then, completely without warning, he let out a short, incredulous laugh. The sound startled even him. It had been a long time since he'd laughed at anything. "Well," he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck as though trying to rearrange the moment into something sensible. "If they snore, I'll build a room." The words came out before he fully thought them through. But the moment they left his mouth, something inside him shifted, like a locked door opening a crack for the first time in years. The snore wasn't remarkable in itself. Children snore. But something about that soft sound, that unguarded innocence, caught him off guard. It reminded him painfully of the nights he used to check on his younger sister long before the fever took her. It reminded him of the fragile, beautiful things in the world he had tried so hard to shut out. He tore his eyes away, finally reading the note. As he scanned the words, his jaw tightened. It was a plea, a last attempt, a confession of desperation written by a woman who clearly had nowhere else to go. She said she'd heard he was a good man, that he sometimes helped travelers, that she had run from something dangerous, and that she would work in exchange for shelter just for one night, so her children could rest. Cole stood and let out a long breath. He glanced at them again, this time with a gentler expression. Whatever she had run from must have been terrible enough that she risked sleeping on the porch of a stranger's home in the middle of ranch country. He hadn't asked for this responsibility, but now that it had been dropped in his path, he felt unable to walk away from it. He reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from the little girl's face. She did not wake. The boy breathed steadily, and the woman, Emma Hawley, as the note revealed, looked as though she hadn't known true rest in months. Cole backed away slowly, careful not to disturb them. He walked inside, set the lantern down, and leaned both hands on the kitchen counter. Old loneliness wrapped around him, but it didn't feel quite as bitter as before. He slid open a drawer and pulled out spare blankets. Then he stepped back outside, draped them carefully over the sleeping trio, and whispered to the night, "You can stay until morning. We'll figure the rest out then." But Cole already knew he wasn't sending them away at dawn. Not after seeing how exhausted they were. Not after reading that note. Not after hearing that tiny snore that cracked open the silence of his home. He didn't yet know how complicated their story was. He didn't know how much danger followed them. He didn't know how much they would change his life. All he knew was that everything began right here on a quiet porch, under the soft glow of a lantern, with a widow, 2 children, and a rancher whose heart had been asleep far longer than they had. Morning on the Harding Ranch usually began in silence. Cole Harding woke long before dawn, brewed coffee thick enough to wake the dead, and started his chores without fanfare. But on this particular morning, the air felt different. Not tense exactly, but full of questions. Full of the presence of people who had not been there yesterday. As the first rays of sunlight brushed the porch, Emma Hawley stirred beneath the blankets Cole had laid over her the night before. She blinked groggy, unsure at first of where she was. Her last memory had been collapsing onto the porch with her children after miles of desperate travel. She had hoped that the owner might allow them to rest for a few hours before turning them away. But now she opened her eyes to soft morning light, a warm blanket, and the sight of her children still asleep beside her. A second later, she noticed him. Cole Harding stood a short distance away, not close enough to intimidate her, but close enough to show he had been watching, waiting for her to wake. His arms were crossed, his hat tilted just enough to shade his eyes. He didn't speak immediately, giving her a few seconds to gather her bearings. She appreciated that more than he knew. Emma quickly checked her children. They were safe, still sleeping, still breathing evenly. Relief washed through her like rain on parched soil. She sat up slowly, blanket pooling around her waist, and whispered, "Thank you, whoever you are, for letting us sleep." Cole's expression didn't soften, but something in his posture did. "Name's Cole Harding. This is my ranch." He nodded toward the porch. "You picked a cold spot. Figured you might freeze if I left you out here." Emma flushed with embarrassment. "I'm sorry. We didn't mean to intrude. We just didn't have anywhere else to go." Cole studied her for a long moment, long enough that Emma felt every insecurity rise to the surface. She knew how she must look: dirty, exhausted, desperate. She tightened her arms around herself as if to hide it. Finally, he asked the question that had been simmering in his mind since the moment he found them. "Who are you running from?" The words hung in the morning air like the toll of a church bell. Deep, heavy, impossible to ignore. Emma's stomach twisted. She had known this question would come, but she still wasn't ready for it. Not emotionally, not mentally, not in her bones. She glanced down at her children, her reason for everything, and then back up at the rancher who waited with patience she didn't expect from a stranger. She hesitated for nearly a full minute. Cole didn't push. He didn't repeat the question. He simply waited. And that ironically was what made her begin to speak. My husband, she said quietly, died 6 months ago. Cole didn't react outwardly, but his eyes softened a bit. Emma continued, her voice trembling like an old porch board in the wind. He made mistakes. Not the kind you come back from. When he got sick, he borrowed money to pay for medicine. Promised he'd work it off once he recovered. Her jaw tightened. But he didn't recover. And the man he borrowed from isn't the kind who forgives debt. Cole straightened slightly. He'd heard that tone before, the tone of fear laced with humiliation. What kind of man? He asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. The kind who thinks everything has a price. Emma's voice cracked. Including people. Something clicked in Cole's mind. That explained the exhaustion, the fear, the desperation he'd seen in her eyes even in sleep. She swallowed hard. He said I could pay off the debt my husband owed. By being his wife. Her face flushed with shame and fury. And he said he'd take my children too. Replace the ones his last wife couldn't give him, he told me. Cole's jaw clenched so tightly it felt like his teeth might crack. Emma lowered her head. I refused. And he told me I didn't have a choice. That was all Cole needed to hear. He was silent for a moment. Not because he doubted her story, but because anger had risen in him so quickly, so fiercely that he needed to steady himself before he spoke. Emma watched him cautiously, unsure whether he believed her or whether he would turn them away like others had. Finally, he exhaled sharply and looked at her with a clarity that felt like stepping into sunlight. You're safe here, Cole said. For as long as you need. Emma blinked, stunned. She had expected questions, skepticism, maybe even suspicion, but not this. Not immediate reassurance. Not kindness offered without hesitation. But you don't know me, she whispered. You don't know if I'm trouble. Cole shrugged lightly. Trouble's already on my land. I found you on my porch, didn't I? It was such a simple statement, but it held so much weight. In his own quiet way, he was telling her that her presence didn't bother him, that her story didn't scare him, that helping her wasn't a burden. When she remained frozen, unsure whether she was allowed to believe him, Cole gestured toward the door. Come inside, he said. Get the kids warm. I'll make breakfast. Emma's breath stuttered. Warmth, food, safety. These were luxuries she had only dreamed of for weeks. Still, she hesitated. Trust was not something she could afford to give easily, not anymore. Cole noticed her hesitation. Look, he said, tone gentler now, you don't owe me anything. I'm not asking for payment. Just, let me help. Those words hit her with unexpected force. She had been treated like a debt, a burden, a possession. And now here was a man offering help without asking for anything in return. Her eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. The rancher pretended not to notice. Okay, she whispered. She gently woke her children. The boy, half asleep, asked, Mama, is it morning already? The little girl simply rubbed her eyes and leaned against her mother's shoulder. Cole watched them, a strange ache blooming in his chest. It had been years since he'd seen children on this ranch. Years since laughter had filled the rooms. Years since someone besides him had sat at the worn wooden table dot as the family stepped into his home. Emma paused at the doorway and looked back at him. Thank you, she said softly. You don't know what this means. Cole thought of the lonely nights, the empty rooms, the ghosts of the past that lingered in every corner of his home. Maybe he did know. Come on, he said. Breakfast won't cook itself. And just like that, the beginning of trust settled between them, fragile but real, like the first light of dawn stretching over a dark valley. The Harding Ranch had been quiet for so long that its silence had become a second kind of weather, something that settled on the land in layers, something you didn't notice until it changed. And on the morning Emma and her children stepped inside, the silence shifted. Not vanished, just loosened, like a saddle strap being unbuckled after a long ride. Cole motioned them forward with a simple nod. The children clung to Emma's skirt at first, their small bodies trembling with uncertainty. Emma guided them carefully across the threshold as if expecting the floorboards to collapse or a trap to spring. Trauma had conditioned them to assume safety never lasted. Inside, the house was warm from the stove and smelled faintly of coffee and wood smoke. It was not fancy. Cole lived plainly, but it was clean, sturdy, and undeniably home. "Sit," Cole said, pointing toward the long wooden table. "Breakfast'll be ready in a few minutes." Emma hovered instead of obeying, wringing her hands. "We don't want to be a bother. Truly, Mr. Harding, if you have work for me, cleaning, tending the garden, laundry, I'll do whatever you need. I don't take charity." Cole turned from the stove slowly, wiping his hands on a towel. He studied her, not with judgment, but with a steady calm that made her feel more seen than exposed. "This ain't charity," he said simply. "It's hospitality. You and the kids need rest more than chores." Emma opened her mouth to argue, but Cole raised a hand, not forcefully, but with a gentle finality. "Sit, eat. That's all I'm asking today." The firmness in his tone surprised her. Not controlling, not threatening, just sure. And Emma realized how long it had been since someone had spoken to her with confidence that wasn't tied to dominance or ownership. She finally nodded and lowered herself into a chair. Her children followed, the boy staring at Cole with cautious curiosity, the girl hiding half her face behind her mother's arm. Cole ladled food onto plates: eggs, potatoes fried with onions, thick slices of bread. Nothing extravagant, but hearty, filling. When he placed the first plate in front of the little girl, she looked up at him with wide, uncertain eyes. He hesitated, then crouched down to her level. "You can eat as much as you want. There's plenty." Her bottom lip quivered. "Can we really?" Cole blinked. He hadn't expected that question. "Course you can," he said softly. "You're my guests." The girl looked at her brother, who gave a small nod as if he were the one who had to approve the safety of the world first. Only then did she pick up the fork. Emma's eyes filled with tears she didn't let fall. The meal was quiet at first, punctuated only by the scraping of forks against plates and the occasional soft question from the children. They hadn't spoken much to a stranger in months. But Cole had a way of making silence feel comfortable, not frightening. After breakfast, he showed them around the house, where the wash basin was, where they could store their things, where the children could sleep for now, and where Emma could rest. When they stepped into the guest room, Emma froze. It had a real bed, a quilt, a window that looked out onto open land instead of a road she feared footsteps on. "You sure?" she whispered. "We can sleep in the barn if needed." Cole shook his head. "Barn's for the horses. This room's for you." A strange warmth pressed at Emma's chest. She couldn't remember the last time someone gave her something without expecting payment, loyalty, or obedience in return. Cole hesitated at the doorway. "You want privacy, take it. If you need anything, holler. I'll be outside working." She nodded and watched him leave, not with suspicion this time, but with something close to gratitude. Later that morning, a ranch reveals itself. The children were the first to truly explore. At first they stayed glued to Emma's side, but the moment they noticed a pair of barn cats sunning themselves on the windowsill, curiosity tugged them outward. Emma tried to call them back, but Cole appeared on the porch and said gently, "They're safe. Let 'em look around." He led them to the barn, explaining each animal with patient simplicity. The boy touched a horse for the first time and gasped. The little girl followed Cole with shy fascination, watching the way he handled the animals, calm, confident, steady. Emma stood nearby. arms folded tightly as if unsure whether to stay or run forward to snatch her children back. But as she saw Cole's carefulness and the way the children's faces slowly brightened, her shoulders began to relax. She had forgotten what it was like to hear her children laugh without fear choking the sound. Cole noticed the change in her, though he said nothing. He understood that healing didn't announce itself with fanfare. It crept in quietly, the same way warmth seeped into the wood of the porch every morning. Emma insists on helping around midday. Emma approached him while he worked near the stables. "Mr. Harding," she began, "I can't just sit while you're doing all the work. Please, let me help with something." Cole removed his gloves and studied her again. She looked healthier, already still tired, still worn down, but standing straighter now that the crushing weight of constant fear wasn't pushing her into the dirt. "You'll help," he said. "But not today." But no. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "You've been running. Probably haven't slept right in months. Take a day. Your body needs it more than the ranch does." She opened her mouth to argue but then shut it. He wasn't dismissing her. He wasn't patronizing her. He was caring for her in the only way he knew, directly, honestly, without complication. Emma bowed her head. "Thank you." Cole nodded and returned to work. Emma stayed for a moment, watching him drive fence posts, noticing the controlled strength in each movement. He worked not like a man eager for admiration, but like one who had lived too long with only himself to rely on. Something about that steadiness began to feel safe. Evening. A quiet refuge takes shape by sunset. The children were asleep in their new room, worn out by excitement rather than fear for the first time in months. Emma stood by the doorway, staring at them with an expression Cole couldn't quite read. Relief, mixed with heartbreak for everything they'd endured. Cole leaned against the wall quietly. "They're good kids." Emma nodded. "They used to laugh all the time, before everything fell apart." "They're laughing again," Cole said. "That's a start." Emma breathed out shakily. "This place? It doesn't feel like a stranger's home anymore." Cole looked surprised for a split second, then hit it. "Good. I want it to feel safe." Emma's eyes softened. "It does." For the first time since she arrived, she believed her future might hold something other than running. That night, as Cole stepped out onto the porch alone, he felt a shift in the air, a sense that the ranch, long silent and hollow, was slowly waking up. He wasn't sure what it meant yet, but he knew one thing: a refuge had begun. Peace for Emma had become a fragile new experience, so delicate she was almost afraid to touch it. But on the Harding Ranch, peace began to stitch itself slowly into her days. The children played in the barn, fed chickens, followed Cole like loyal puppies. Emma cooked sometimes, helped sweep the floors, folded laundry with tender gratitude. Cole's home, once an echoing space of silence, now lived with small noises, soft footsteps, children's whispers, the quiet hum of a woman trying to rebuild her life. For a brief moment, the world felt right. And that is why the return of fear was so jarring. It happened on a late afternoon, one of those warm western days when the horizon shimmered under a golden haze. Cole was outside repairing a fence rail, and the children played with the barn cats while Emma hung freshly washed clothes on the line. At first, everything looked normal. Then Cole straightened suddenly. He had sensed something, an instinct sharp enough to put a man on alert before his mind explained why. He scanned the open land beyond the ranch, eyes narrowing. Emma followed his gaze. A rider approached slowly along the distant road, dust rising behind the horse's hooves. Not fast, not hurried, just purposeful. A hunter moving toward prey with confidence that the outcome was already decided. Cole didn't like that posture. Didn't like the man's deliberate pace. He didn't like the feeling crawling across his skin. Kids. Cole said quietly, keeping his voice calm. Inside, now? The boy blinked, confused. But we're playing. Inside? Cole repeated, firmer this time but not unkind. The children obeyed instantly. They had lived long enough in fear to recognize danger in an adult's tone. Emma's breath tightened in her chest. The silhouette on the horse, the way the man sat tall in the saddle, the shape of the coat, the dark hat pulled low hit her like a blow. Her knees weakened. Emma? Cole asked quietly, her lips parted in a whisper that barely made sound. It's him. Cole didn't need clarification. The tremor in her voice said everything. Her face had gone pale, drained of all color. He moved instinctively, stepping forward so that his body shielded her partly from view. Inside, he murmured, not as an order, but as protection. Emma clutched his shirt sleeve. Please don't confront him. He's dangerous. So am I, Cole said, calm as a quiet storm. In that moment, Emma realized. Cole Harding was not simply a man who lived alone. He was a man who had survived hardship, loss, pain enough that nothing frightened him easily. The rider drew closer. The horse slowed near the gate. The man raised his head slightly, scanning the ranch with deliberate confidence. Cole remained motionless, standing tall in the center of the yard, hat low, shoulders squared in a stance that said, "This land is mine." The rider pulled his horse to a stop a few yards from the fence. Dust swirled around hooves. Silence stretched thin as wire. "You Harding?" The stranger called. Cole didn't answer immediately. He just stared with a stillness that unnerved even hardened men. "Who's asking?" Cole finally said. The rider shifted in the saddle. His voice held a smirk Emma knew too well. "Name's Pritchard. I'm looking for a woman and 2 kids. Widow. Belonged to a man who owed me more than he could pay." Emma flinched. Cole didn't miss it. Pritchard continued, tone casual in the way of someone who believed the world was his to command. "She ran out on me. Figure she might have come through this way. You see anyone matching that description?" Emma trembled behind Cole's back, pressing one hand over her mouth to stop a sob. She felt helpless, exposed, terrified. But then she realized something. She wasn't facing him alone. Cole's voice was low and steady, unbothered by the threat beneath Pritchard's words. "No one here belongs to you." Pritchard's eyes darkened. "You sure about that?" "I'm sure of 2 things, Cole replied. "First, there's no woman here who owes you anything. Second, this is private property. You're trespassing." A beat of silence. Emma held her breath. Pritchard leaned forward in the saddle. "You trying to pick a fight, Harding?" Cole's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "If I was, you'd know." That simple statement, a quiet promise, carried more weight than shouting ever could. Pritchard studied him, weighing the man in front of him. Cole wasn't bluffing. Cole wasn't afraid. And Cole wasn't moving aside. Finally, Pritchard tugged the reins. The horse turned slightly, but before he left, he delivered a final threat. "If she's here, I'll find her. One way or another." Cole stepped forward with the slow, confident stride of a man who didn't bluff. "Come back on my land looking for what ain't yours," he said softly, "and you'll regret it." Pritchard hesitated just long enough to show he'd heard the warning. Then he rode away. Emma collapsed onto the porch steps the moment the dust cloud disappeared. Her entire body trembled. Her breath came in shallow bursts. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I didn't want to bring this here. I didn't want to drag danger to your home." Cole knelt in front of her, resting one steady hand on her shoulder. "Emma," he said, voice firm but gentle, "you didn't bring trouble. Trouble found you. Big difference." She shook her head. "He's not going to give up. He'll come back. Then I'll be ready." Those 4 words hit her harder than anything else he'd said. that no one had ever stood between her and danger before. No one had ever chosen to protect her without expecting something in return. No one had ever meant the words "you're safe" the way Cole Harding did. She broke then silently, painfully leaning into her hands as tears fell freely. Cole didn't touch her beyond that steady hand on her shoulder. He simply stayed. Stayed until her shaking eased. Stayed until she could breathe again. When she finally lifted her head, eyes red and voice hoarse, she whispered, "Why are you helping us?" Cole looked at the horizon where the rider had disappeared. "Because nobody should have to face a man like that alone," he said quietly. "And because you and those kids deserve better than what life's handed you so far." It was the closest thing to a promise he had ever given. And for the first time, Emma believed she had a protector, not just a place to hide. After the encounter with Pritchard, the ranch felt different, but not in the way Emma feared. She expected dread to settle like thick smoke, expected the children to shrink back into silence, expected Cole to distance himself from the danger she'd brought. Instead, the opposite happened. Cole woke before dawn the next morning, as always, but this time he had a purpose burning behind his ribs. He wasn't a man who waited for trouble to strike. He faced it head on, planned for it, prepared his ground up before the sun even rose. He reinforced the gate and stable doors, checked the rifles he kept stored in a locked cabinet, and walked the property for weak points. His movements were calm, methodical, almost reassuring. It was clear he had experience with threats, with loss, with defending what mattered. This wasn't new to him. It was simply a part of life. He hoped he'd never need again. Emma watched him through the kitchen window, her hands still trembling from the previous day. She felt guilt eating at her heart. Cole didn't ask for this. He didn't deserve it. The ranch had probably been peaceful, even lonely, but safe. Now danger had seeped into the soil because of her. But when Cole returned inside and found her staring anxiously at the doorway, he shook his head before she spoke a word. "Don't," he said quietly. "Don't blame yourself." Tears pricked her eyes. "Cole, I've brought a violent man onto your land." He stepped closer, his voice firm but not harsh. "Emma, I'm not afraid of him. And I'm not about to throw out a woman and 2 kids who've already been through hell. This ranch ain't just a piece of land. It's a home. And you're in it now." That sentence, "you're in it now," shattered another layer of fear around her heart. Days pass, and safety slowly returns. The days that followed were some of the most unexpectedly healing of Emma's life. Cole didn't smother her or hover. He didn't interrogate her or demand anything. He simply kept his word. He protected her, but he also let her breathe. He spent the mornings working the ranch as usual. But now the children followed him with excitement instead of fear. He taught the boy Tommy how to ride. At first, Tommy clung to the saddle like a barn cat in a windstorm, but Cole walked beside him patiently, steadying the horse and giving simple instructions in that low, steady voice. "Sit tall. Don't grip too tight. Let the horse feel you're confident, even if you ain't." Tommy's laughter real. Unguarded laughter echoed across the ranch for the first time since Emma could remember. Meanwhile, the little girl Sarah toddled after Cole every time he fed the chickens or checked the eggs. She had taken a quiet liking to him. She didn't speak much, but she followed him like a tiny shadow, peeking around corners with wide eyes whenever he worked. Cole didn't mind. In fact, he found himself softening in ways he didn't expect. When Sarah held out a cracked egg and asked in a tiny whisper, "Is this okay?" Cole knelt down and explained gently how to handle them. When she sneezed and the chickens scattered, he pretended to be shocked until she giggled, and Emma watched. It all with a growing warmth in her chest won. That scared her almost as much as it soothed her. Cole was building something with her. Children, something solid, something kind. Something safe. For the first time in months, Emma slept without waking in a panic. Pritchard returns. But he isn't alone. It happened on a day when the sky hung low and heavy with clouds. The kind of day that made nerves hum beneath the skin. Cole sensed something wrong before he saw it. He motioned to Emma and the children to stay inside. Then the sound came: hoofbeats. Pritchard rode toward the ranch again, but this time he wasn't smirking with confidence. He looked frustrated, angry, almost desperate. He dismounted at the gate, shouting Cole's name as if the land owed him obedience. Cole calmly stepped onto the porch. Emma watched through the window. Holding Sarah tight against her chest, Tommy gripping her sleeve. "You hiding her?" Pritchard barked. "I know she's here. And I want what's mine." Cole descended one step. "She's not yours." "Not now, not ever." Pritchard's hand edged toward the revolver on his hip. Emma gasped softly. But then another voice rang out. "That's enough." "Pritchard." It was Sheriff Abrams. He and the deputy rode up behind Pritchard with perfect timing. Dust settling around them like a curtain. Emma's breath caught. She hadn't expected help from the law. Pritchard had connections, influence, and an ugly way of twisting things in his favor, but Cole had gone into town quietly that morning before sunrise and told the sheriff everything. Not Emma's private pain, but the danger she was in. The sheriff had listened. And when Cole told him Pritchard had come to his ranch making claims on a woman and children, the sheriff didn't hesitate. "Pritchard," the sheriff called, "the debt you're talking about ain't valid. You got no claim on a woman or her kids. And you sure as hell don't have the right to threaten a rancher on his own land." Pritchard's face twisted. "She owes me. She owes you nothing," Abrams snapped. "And you're coming with us for intimidation, unlawful threats, and attempted coercion." The deputy disarmed him. Pritchard tried to twist away, shouting curses. But the sheriff dragged him toward the wagon. Emma pressed her hand to her mouth, tears filling her eyes, not of fear, but of release. Months of terror began to unwind inside her chest. Before Pritchard was hauled away, he looked at Cole with pure venom. "You'll regret this," he spat. Cole didn't flinch. "No," he said softly, "I won't." And he did single quotes freedom. Finally, when the sheriff's wagon disappeared into town, Emma walked out onto the porch slowly, as if afraid the moment would dissolve if she moved too fast. "Is it over?" she whispered. Cole nodded once. "It's over." She covered her face with her hands and cried, the deep, shaking tears of someone who had been holding pain in too long. Cole stepped forward, hesitated only a second, then gently placed a hand on her back. She leaned into him, not out of weakness but out of relief. "You're safe now," he murmured. "You can stay here, as long as you want." Emma looked up, her face streaked with tears. "Cole, do you really mean that? I don't want to be a burden. I want to help. I want to belong." Cole swallowed, emotion tightening his throat in a way he hadn't expected. "You and those kids," he said slowly. "You belong here more than you know." Emma's breath caught. "Then I want to stay. Not just for safety, because this feels like home." Cole exhaled a long, quiet breath that held years of loneliness melting away. "Then stay," he said. And that was the beginning of something new, something healing. Real, steady. The final promise kept a week later. Cole began building a small room onto the house. Emma watched him from the porch, her heart full. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. Cole looked over his shoulder, a hint of a smile tugging at his mouth. "Because," he said, "the first night I found you, I said if the kids snored, I'd build a room." Emma laughed a soft, beautiful sound. "They snored loud," Cole added, hammering another board. And the ranch, once silent and hollow, finally became whole. A home, a refuge, a family.